In this video, I'm going to go over the latest information that's been released exposing that the RBA tried to cover up what could happen to the Australian property market. The Reserve Bank of Australia tried to keep hush-hush about the real situation that's going on in the Australian property market, and they don't want you to know what they think will happen. The Reserve Bank of Australia is not happy. The ABC exposed how some staff in the Reserve Bank of Australia really knew what was going to happen to the Australian property market. They knew there was going to be a crash, but the public announcement that the RBA has put out about the Australian property market, about how it's been so resilient, how it's all good, because really the Reserve Bank of Australia is just big cheerleaders that cheer the Australian property market, and they also cheer the Australian economy, because if they say anything negative, that is going to impact consumer confidence, and it's going to impact business confidence, and it's going to make this recession even worse. Internal emails released by the Freedom of Information showed the Reserve Bank tried to cover up the name of staff in emails that it was forced to release by the Freedom of Information. Documents from inside the Reserve Bank of Australia were found where the Australian Reserve Bank economists were considering urging the government to shut down the real estate market because they didn't want people to go into a panic thinking that the pandemic would induce a steep market crash. Reserve Bank of Australia Secretary Anthony Dickman, that's right, his last name is Dickman, that's a bit weird, released a statement saying, no, this was just a view of one economist. He was just a junior economist. He was a nobody. It's not from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Don't listen to what he says. This has nothing to do with us, and they're pretty much trying to wash their hands with it. Assistant Governor in the financial system, Michelle Bullock, said, it was just, discussions between economists on how to interpret the housing market data, aka how can we manipulate this data so it doesn't look like there's a market crash when there actually is. She says it wasn't a policy recommendation, or maybe now it's not a policy recommendation now that it's been called out and now that there's been a bit uproar about this. The economists at the Reserve Bank of Australia were so fearful of an Australian property market crash, or even the thought that there could be an Australian property market crash, that they were considering telling Australian private firms that report housing data to stop releasing housing data. Economist Nick Garvin told his colleagues that they should consider stop releasing housing market data because the market wasn't functioning normally, and he tried to compare the housing market to the stock market. He says it's too dangerous for regulators to release the data. It's too dangerous, aka we don't want the people to know. It's too dangerous for the housing market to release this data. So let's treat it like equities, where they pause the data and let's just take a break, let's chill out, everything's going to be okay, and we'll come back to when everything's rosy and prices are booming again. And of course, when they found that people got on top of this, or people started finding out about this, they went to the media to try put out a story about, it's just too hard in this market. They went to the Australian Financial Review, of course, to put out reasons why they can't report. It's too hard, and try to back this economist's view on why they should pause housing data because it's too dangerous. We can't let the property market crash. We can't even think about the Australian property market crash. Now, there was a few emails sent with some dodgy things. There was things retracted, and they didn't go through with it. Minutes of the board's meeting on the 5th of May were released, and they did admit in the May meeting that there was going to be some demand shrunk for new and existing houses, and there was also going to be a reduction in incomes. But inside the RBA, the warnings were more clear and the warnings were more severe. Lucy Ellis, the Assistant Governor for Economics, says it has become clear that there has been a reduction for demand of new houses, and even contracts that were for new houses have been cancelled and plans for new builds have been deferred. Once the notes were made public by the ABC, Dr. Ellis at the RBA refused to do a media interview. She says she has no appetite, she doesn't want to do it, she doesn't want to come on public record. She says that her view weren't different to the public notes that were released, and hers were just speaking notes. The internal reports at the RBA contradicted their public reports that they've been putting out to the public about the billions of dollars, the millions of jobs that are tied up in the housing, construction and real estate industry. So, what does this information mean for everyday Australians like you and me? A lot of Australians aren't aware on how much of an impact what the decisions the Reserve Bank of Australia makes has on all of our lives. Literally, with a few keystrokes, they can print currency to pump into the economy, which will inflate asset prices but will decrease the money in your bank account. Also, they can change interest rates, which can have a big effect on the Australian people because they can either increase or lower interest rates, which is going to affect your mortgage payments. So things just do not seem right here to me. And I think the Reserve Bank knows what's going to happen to the Australian property market. They know there's a crash coming. They know how bad things are in the economy, but they do not want the public to be informed. And this is leading the Australian people into a false sense of security that once the restrictions are eased, everything's going to go back to normal. Everything's going to be okay. Do not worry. Spend now. Spend your money. We need you to spend your money because that's what the economy relies on, is consumer spending. Take on more debt. We love it when debt increases. We love it when people get more mortgages, and we love it when you spend. Do not save. Just spend everything you have and get more debt. This is what the Reserve Bank and the government love. And this is why Australia has become one of the most indebted nations in the world. Literally, people are still buying now, pay later, like Afterpay, Zip Pay. People are still spending like there's no tomorrow because we haven't had a recession in 30 years. But I'm telling you, bad things are coming and you need to prepare now. The Reserve Bank of Australia does not have your best interest at heart. Their main objective is to keep liquidity for the banks, to put a rosy picture out there for the economy so it boosts business confidence, boosts consumer confidence, and they're pretty much just cheerleaders for the Australian economy because every word they say affects the stock market, it affects the housing market, and it affects the business sector. So what this means is, it means that the Reserve Bank of Australia is really terrified that the Australian people will find out that the property market that always goes up, that always doubles every 7 to 10 years, is going to crash. Literally, all of our wealth is tied up in property. Australia has one of the highest median wealths in the world, only second to Switzerland, and that is only because of people that have properties worth $1 million, $2 million, and they have lots of money tied up in superannuation. This is why I'm making this channel, because I need to make sure that the Australian people are informed of what's really going on. Things are going to get bad. We're not going to have a V-shaped recovery. Remember at the start we were saying, hey guys, don't worry, we're just going to lock down for a month or two. We'll just, put the economy on pause, but don't worry, everything's going to be booming in the third and fourth quarter. Well, guess what? We're here. Things are not booming. Things are getting worse. Queensland is now going into lockdown. So we need to prepare, and I'm going to tell you how to prepare. If you have high interest debt, besides your mortgage, you need to start paying down debt now because things are going to get tough. Then once you've paid down debt, you need to create emergency fund because they've had job losses in the, the tourism and the retail and the hospitality sector. But once those jobs are gone and people stop spending in other sectors, we're starting to start seeing a second wave of job losses in the other sectors. So if you think you have secure work, you still need to create an emergency fund of at least 3 to 6 months living expenses. And that way, if you do lose your job, you don't have to rely on the government because who knows, they could just pull JobKeeper out anytime, they could pull JobSeeker out anytime, or they could make you jump through 100 different loops and things just to qualify. Now, this is not financial advice, but a hedge against inflation and a hedge against the Aussie dollar crashing is things like gold, silver, Bitcoin. So hey, if you have some spare cash, you've paid off all your high interest debt, you've got an emergency fund, hey, you might want to consider doing that. That's just one thing I'm going to do. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it's literally what I would do in this situation when reserve banks are printing money like crazy. And in Turkey, the lira is literally crashing and people are buying gold because their currency is being devalued rapidly. So what do you guys think? Comment below. Let me know, do you think that the Reserve Bank of Australia has your best interests at heart? Do you think that they have, the average day Australian's best interests at heart? And do you believe when they say that this was just, a few colleagues chit-chatting, they think that the Australian property market is still going to be okay? Or do you think that Reserve Bank knows something that we don't know and they think or know that it will crash? This is big. This just proves how much that the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Australian government rely on the property market. And this just goes to show that they will go at any lengths to stop it from crashing and to keep the bubble going. If this video brought you value, please like for the holy YouTube algorithm. Subscribe subscribe. I want to thank everyone. We just hit 2K subscribers and I'm overwhelmed by the support I've received so far. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.